Hi everyone, my name's Jodie Mack and I'm an associate professor of animation here at Dartmouth College in the Department of Film and Media Studies. Excuse me. Um, I am so excited to introduce our guest for the evening, Miwa Matreyek. Miwa is an animator, director, designer, and performer based in Los Angeles, and she's been an internationally touring independent artist since 2010. Coming from a background in animation by way of collage, Miwa creates live staged performances in animation where she interacts with her animations as a shadow silhouette, working at the cross section of cinematic and theatrical, fantastical and tangible, illusionistic and physical. She performs her interdisciplinary shadow performances all over the world, including animation film festivals, theater and performance festivals, art museums, science museums, and tech conferences. And a few past presentations include the TED Conference, MoMA, Lincoln Center, Sundance New Frontier, Future of Storytelling Conference, and the Exploratorium in San Francisco. So we are in for such a treat tonight, and Miwa is definitely one of my favorite living artists. Miwa Matreyek received her MFA for experimental animation and integrated media from CalArts in 2007, and she's also a founder and core collaborator of the multimedia company Cloud Eye Control. So if I may give a big warm welcome, I'm going to welcome Miwa Matreyek here with us tonight. Hello, Miwa.
Hi, Jodie. Thanks for the introduction. So I'm Miwa Matreyek, and I'm excited to be here tonight with you all in your homes for Hop at Home. And I guess without further ado, we'll start with the first clip just so you get a sense of the kind of work that I do. And then Jodie and I will have conversations between video clips and slides.
Wow, such a pleasure to see that again, Miwa. Could you speak a little bit about what inspired you to make this piece, This World Made Itself?
Sure. When I was thinking about making this piece, I can only show little clips for the talk right now, but overall the piece is about the history of the Earth. So it literally starts with the Big Bang into the Earth forming as like a ball of molten lava, and my shadow kind of like awakening in the fire, as if the Earth is kind of, or like Gaia is kind of like awakening, becoming aware of itself. And from there, it goes through like the atmospheres forming into the oceans, into evolution, into like sort of the modern complex world of humans on Earth. And the original inspiration came from going to a lot of natural history museums, which is one of my obsessions. So like looking at, dioramas and displays of prehistoric worlds and thinking about what it would be like to be there to see like these moments in evolution. As well as at that time, since I'm at home, I just pulled the book off the shelf. I was reading this book, Bill Bryson, A Short History of Nearly Everything, which really is about everything from like the universe forming to like, the Earth and like geology and like development of different like scientific fields too. So that was kind of informing, going to natural history museums, as well as because I was flying a lot, touring as a touring performing artist, spending a lot of time in airplanes, and I always sit by the window and look out, down to the world below. And because I was, again, looking at it kind of through those lens, thinking about what the Earth below looked like millions and billions of years ago, when there used to be like oceans in the middle of North America. And especially when you fly over the Southwest, like, because there, like in parts of it, there isn't a lot of vegetation that you can really read the landscapes and how, oh, this is where all these like erosion and like water like washes down into this valley and into a river. So I really love kind of like trying to decipher landscapes in those kinds of ways. So I was taking a lot of just iPhone photos. There's like a bunch of collections of that on my phone and then my computer. And I'll actually, if you can show slide A and slide B. So slide A, yeah. Yeah, so here you can see some of the landscapes and, just like both natural landscapes as well as like kind of human engineered landscapes, as well as slide B. Especially in the Southwest, again, because the landscape is like pretty bare, like desert landscapes, to see like fracking, like the ones that look like little bald spots and nodes, as well as like mining and stuff, and how this looked like, open sores and scratches, and kind of thinking viscerally about how it looked painful. So I think that kind of, again, led me into telling the story of the Earth as if sometimes my shadow represents the Earth itself as a body. And I think slide C. Oh, so we'll show this scene in the next clip. But so something like those images that I saw from the airplane of fracking and mining kind of interpreted it itself into this kind of moment of like a mountaintop removal kind of moment of my shadow kind of being taken apart in pieces and removed and mined until I'm kind of like bare and crumbling. So maybe from here, if you want to play the other clip from This World Made Itself.
this, where clover's always green. So I didn't need money, but I got a little thrill. I don't even know what to say to your tight face. You look a tad guilty as you finger at the fill. Don't even know my last name. So and I, so happens rattling and their best friends. Who cares? You're nothing but a pony. I had a home, I made a home without you. No, it wouldn't be the money. I have a ton of famous friends. I'm doggy of the scene. Please I don't even know what to say, your time was a bad ride, so just trying to be clear. Don't even know my last name, so now it's right. You're the new friends, so who cares? We're nothing but I know how to cry. I'm broke about so many knees are on. Good luck without me. I can see how this is funny.
Wow, I loved watching that so much. I'll never forget first meeting me while she was setting up a bunch of cardboard boxes and moving her projector to get everything to line up perfectly to show her work to a group of high school students. But speaking of science, Miwa, given that so much of your work is fascinated with science and the history of the Earth, can you reflect a little for us on the role of science in your work?
Sure. I wanted to notate before that for the two clips for this woman itself, for the sections that I showed, the music is by my friend Eric Lindley, who I know from Cal Arts, but he's also a Dartmouth alum from 05 too. So, you know, a little, yeah. Yeah, so, but he's a great musician. But going back to the question, as well as kind of going back to the clip that we saw. So I think I actually switched the numbers in my head, so it played backwards. But I wanted to note also that the piece begins with me in front of the screen. So you see me holding the timeline in front of the audience. And then from there, I go behind the screen. So from there, I'm a shadow for the whole rest of it. But it's kind of like giving away a little bit of like what I will be doing for the rest of the show from the audience's side. Just flipped from what I would be doing from the back side of the screen. And in case anybody's wondering, I am using front and rear projection with animation. So that's how I put images in front of me, or in that case, because I was in front, the timeline was coming from a rear projection. But it's kind of about like this pretend holding an interaction with light that's all choreographed as I build the complexity of my animation. So going back to the science question, I was actually a science major for like the first 2 years in undergrad. And then I switched to art. But I've always had a fascination with the sciences in terms of imagining worlds and systems that we can't see and experience ourselves on the human scale, like things that are in size, like micro and macro worlds, and also scales of time. So, scales of time is kind of like what I was thinking about with This Film Made Itself, in terms of, again, like being in a natural history museum and thinking like, what would it be like to like be on an Earth that doesn't have an atmosphere yet, and it's just all molten lava, or, so I think the piece is really like trying to imagine that and physicalize those experiences. And let's see, sorry, I'm kind of like looking at notes that I had made as well. And also with this piece, I start to explore more of these ideas of the shadow silhouette representing different perspectives throughout the piece. In the section that we just watched, there were moments where I was like in a kitchen or a dining room. So it's like an experience that we're familiar with, like being in like a home space, a domestic space. But then kind of that switching into like a metaphorical experience of humanity, or the metaphorical experience of the Earth itself, like what I was talking about, a mountain being mined. And sort of through that, creating like a visceral sense of these worlds that are beyond like our normal human experiences, and hopefully trying to approach a concept that I want to address about, like starting with this piece and into the next piece, kind of more and more about like climate change and the human impact on the Earth. Yeah. And then, so if we also, with this piece too, with if we show slide D, so this was in the first clip because I had switched the clip numbers. So it was all my fault. But for example, the whole sequence that I showed, again, with the timeline and the complexity of how it unfolds with like sort of this timeline of evolution, and kind of using the visuals and the physical performance to illustrate kind of these scientific concepts. The idea that if you took all of evolution on a human arm span, then human evolution is like just a sliver of skin at the very tip of your fingertip. And, this is not in scale because it's kind of more of a metaphor and illustration of it. But, by creating extinction that kind of wipes out, like the last, what was it? The white rhinoceros in the wild, that we're kind of erasing these, like obviously we didn't make the dinosaurs go extinct, but in terms of animals that are currently going extinct because of human impact, we are erasing millions of years and, lineages of biological innovation, and these are becoming lost. So this moment that happened in the video, and that's kind of in these slides, are sort of trying to illustrate those kinds of ideas in a very dreamlike, abstracted way.
That's incredible. Well, it sounds like a perfect moment to segue into some of your latest work and what you've been working on now. Should we take a look at a clip from Infinitely Yours, and would you like to introduce it a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. So This Film Made Itself, I completed at the end of 2013, and I was touring that for quite a while. And in 2000, probably like 16 or so, I started thinking about wanting to make a new piece. So I was starting to like kind of catalog and collect, like especially in like the last 5 years. I mean, climate change has been an issue that we've been grappling with for a very long time. But I feel like especially like the last 4 years, it's kind of coming to a head where, it's really present in the news and kind of more in our consciousness. And, like the sense of like climate anxiety that I think the world is starting to feel, that it's getting more and more intense and undeniable for me, and hopefully for a lot of people. So like the development process was a lot of kind of like research and cataloging and just trying to like note take on like articles and headlines, into kind of, and I'll show slides of this after the clip, into like starting to sketch ideas of how I would represent this visually and into performance, into the final form. So like I said, I probably started thinking about it in 2015 or so, but really it was like 18, 19 that I was more fully animating, creating, and sitting down and in front of a computer, just stuck my butt in a chair and like worked on it. So Yeah, I think we can go to the first Infinitely Yours clip.
Wow. After seeing that, I definitely want to know more about the process of making this piece.
Sure. So I have some slides prepared. So I was talking a little bit ahead, like we could show slide 1 in terms of the kinds of articles and headlines that I was like note taking. We can skip slide 2 and go to 3. And I was using an app called Evernote to kind of catalog all these so that, there's links and there's like images just as like creating like a kind of a world building process of like things that I wanted to note take and remember to incorporate into the show. From there, we could go to slide 4. So these would be, I didn't really come from a background so much in like drawing, because I kind of moved more onto collage and then into building animation that's like combining videos and photos and compositing and like moving objects and animating them in the computer. But I do have some process of like kind of imagining through sketches and drawings. So these would be things that I had like drawn in my sketchbook. So this would go into the images in slide 5, which is some of the final images in terms of the part with like thinking about overfishing and just, like depleting the oceans of fish and creating like population collapse of fish to like a process of death and kind of like, recycling ourselves back into the earth. And earth covered in trash. So these are some of the ideas that came from articles that I was trying to illustrate through performance and visuals. There was also slide 6. There was a section in the clip that we saw where I was in a landfill and like all this trash starts pouring out of me. And again, thinking about like, concepts and ideas and how do I illustrate that through performance and visuals. I was looking at statistics that talk about how Americans produce like 4.5 pounds of trash a day. And, of course, like in a lot of ways, the society that we live in, things get taken away. There's a lot of processes of, what it means to support 7.8 billion people on Earth, where it's kind of hidden away from us, or it's kind of out of sight, out of mind, or it's like far away. So, every week our trash gets taken away and we don't think about, where the things that we bought came from or where they're going. But what would it feel like if these 4.5 pounds of trash, like literally poured out of your body, like whatever that might be, like when you total it up to like a week or a month or a year or a lifetime, if that like literally came out of your body, it's like you've produced this, right? So like, again, trying to illustrate that in that moment of the trash scene. Oh, so in slide 7, I had that image again. And also noting here too, that a lot of the trash that I was showing were things that I had like pulled out of my own recycling. Oh, so if the tech people can play the plastic loop clip. So yeah, here's like trash and stuff from around my house that I filmed in a loop so then I can animate them in After Effects as like tumbling out of my body or floating in under the waves in the ocean. I think that's actually in the next clip. So yeah, maybe we go to the next clip. I think the ocean scene is in clip 2.
Sounds great. Wow, so beautiful, Miwa. Um, I wanted to ask you about how you saw the role of artists working with technology amidst the climate crisis today, but also wanted to ask you, it seems like there's a lot of personal influences that have infiltrated into the piece. And how does art balance life for you in the age of the climate crisis, Miwa?
Sure. But again, I want to make a note about the music. So this is all the music for this piece is through my by my friend Morgan Sorn, who's a LA-based musician. And there's a version of this piece that we could do if we were actually touring, where he plays parts of the music live and sings along with it as well. So I just want to note about the music there. Um, well, I'm not sure about the technology part, because I think technology is so ubiquitous these days that animators, even if they're working like pretty hands-on, there's some element of technology if you're using a digital camera, or even if you do everything hand-drawn, that you're editing in yeah, in After Effects, or whatever. But I do want to speak about my work and sort of, again, yeah, like what you mentioned, that a lot of my life kind of becoming integrated in it. I showed you like the trash, just my literal actual trash that was like animating. Um, and if we, yeah, slide 10, we can just kind of go through 10 through 15, because there are a lot of things just from my life. You can just go to the next slide, like this oil field that I saw on a road trip like 2 years ago or something, was just a video that I shot on my iPhone, that later I was like, oh, like there's footage that I have of this moment that I can integrate and rebuild into the piece. If you go to the next one, or I guess in this, there's like some of the trash that I have, as well as like kind of using things, just very hands-on DIY, like a toy trash truck that I bought, and using that as like part of the composited video. Into the next one. Oh, and then there's a river scene, which wasn't in the clip, but I did like go out and shoot the LA River that's been converted into like a river that's like more in nature, that an oil spill happens in. And maybe the next slide as well. And often I am using like my own domestic spaces in the piece. This table was also featured in the showmate itself, for that part where like my dinner on the table like goes back in time, and all the bread turns into wheat and stuff like that. And I'm often using like windows and door frames, and so there's a lot of integration of like kind of my personal life and personal history, in terms of like places that I've been, things that I've interacted with, that kind of rebuilds into the piece itself. So I didn't want to kind of show that. You can go back to the camera. Oh, and like here's another part from the farm, although I kind of made it much more of a factory farm scene later with the cow footage that I already had. Let's see, the climate crisis, sorry, just kind of going back to your question. Well, I feel like artists are, like, especially in this, the climate crisis is so huge. Again, it's about like scale of size and complexity and time, that it's really hard to wrap our minds around. So I think artists help either through kind of documentary images, like actually like going somewhere and shooting footage, or through metaphor and symbolism, need to help visualize and kind of make it like a one-to-one personal experience for the audience. And for me, it's about performing as if it's a personal experience for me that's happening to the shadow self. And hopefully through that, creating a visceral journey for the audience at the same time. And part of that too is, we already showed this slide, but maybe we could go back to slide 8. And I was talking about like these shifts in scale, like a very familiar individual's experience could be being stuck in traffic and just knowing that you're just like using up gas sitting there and polluting, and like you're stuck in traffic, and you want to scream, right? But then sort of like a symbolic, metaphorical society's representation with that would be like actually digging out oil from the ground and like eating it, guzzling it. So, kind of like using art maybe as a like a nightmare / dream interpretation of reality, to kind of help diagnose and kind of collectively grieve together.
Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely, Miwa. Thank you so much for that purview into your work. Um,
Yeah.
at this time, I guess, because we're running short on time, I'd like to
Mhm.
open it up to questions from the audience. So, audience, please go ahead and type your questions. Don't be shy, especially the students. Oh, and it looks like we already have one from Keely. Um, can you speak to the creation slash collaboration process with the composer? Does the score come first and you animate to it, or vice versa, or back and forth?
Mhm. It depends on the project. In the past, I have like commissioned musicians, and it was a very back and forth process. For the two pieces that I just showed, the musicians already had music, um, and because they were, acquaintances and friends, I, approached them and had access to their kind of discography and started going through it. So I had like images in mind and energies in mind. But once I started picking the music and getting the permission to use them, it really helped to have the music to kind of have the backbone of the structure to animate to. And I think for a lot of animators, it is really helpful to have music to animate to. So that's the case with me too. And in some ways, I would love to do the more like collaborative process, but it does add like another layer of complexity on top of all the animating and trying to figure out how I perform with it. So for the last two pieces, I've kind of opted out of that option. Yeah.
For sure. And I guess another question coming in is, do you have any advice to the young students out there?
Hmm. In terms of in reference to or anything.
I don't know, this person hasn't specified,
Yeah.
but maybe young artists who are worried that all professional artist gigs are getting canceled in the pandemic. What shall they do with
Yeah, I mean,
themselves?
that's, I'm still figuring it out because I premiered Infinitely Yours in January and I hope to be touring it like all through this year. And of course, that all got canceled. And both presenters and artists are trying to figure out how to create a new form where we can still bring art to audiences and engage, which is what Hop at Home is about. um, and I think in general for students, something I think about a lot is sort of like finding your own kind of almost idiosyncratic solutions to problem solving instead of sort of like going the way of like the manual or like the way that art making is supposed to be in some ways. Because then, like you kind of run the risk of all art like forms kind of looking the same because you're like, oh, I'm just following the manual. And I think there was a lot of this kind of problem solving and trying to figure out how to make things work in my own work that I think kind of helps give it its own flavor. I think as well as like how much I integrate my personal life too. So it feels very like actually personal to me, as well as yeah, that it has like a kind of a, even though it's made digitally, that has a handmade quality.
Absolutely. I have a comment here from Felipe. Said, it's stunning to watch. I can feel the emotion of the piece. It comes across beautifully in the virtual space, which is a great segue into a question from Sam. How do you feel about your work in the virtual space?
Um, I mean, as a performer, I would really love to actually be in physical space with people. Um, but I think because I have decent documentation of my work, and it is, like because it's on a flat screen, it is like I can screen it in this way. I did add some kind of extra details, like the beginning of Infinitely Yours, when you see me hold up a paper tree, and then go behind the screen. I don't do that for a normal theater show because the audience are in a theater and they know that I'm walking out from behind the curtain. I don't have to kind of highlight that I'm in physical space. But these are the kinds of details I've had to add just so that when people watch it on a Zoom or whatever, that they don't easily, like there's a reminder that I'm not just like, it's not just a film that they're watching, because I think that could get lost in this kind of virtual space.
Yeah, in some ways, I feel like the virtual element even adds a new layer of complexity to your work because we're dealing with this sort of real body space theatrical relationship when watching it in time. But now with this whole added virtual element, it really adds something uh, a little bit creepy in some ways about virtuality, about surveillance. All of these things that are part
Mm.
of our everyday experience become
Hmm.
more heightened.
Hmm.
Um, I have another question from Christine. Christine says, "What is your ethnicity and what role does your heritage play in your creations?"
Um, I am half Japanese and half Polish American, white. Um, I've never considered my work to be about like my background. If anything, I feel like I make work that doesn't have text because growing up as a bilingual person, I have a hard time, like especially like when making art, to commit to one language over the other and wanting to kind of be in a textless, languageless place that's kind of more dreamlike and surreal rather than like tying things to a specific language. Like knowing that there is music that has English words in it, but because I don't consider the music to be the text of the piece, but sort of like a background emotional, um, like kind of carrier of the piece. I don't really consider the lyrics. I make sure that the lyrics kind of are in line with the energy that I want to show in the work. Um, but yeah, I'm not sure. Like that, I think that's as far as I could say about that question. And I'm not
Hmm.
sure if in the future I'll make a piece that directly addresses my heritage, but I don't
Right,
think for these pieces.
right. Well, a lot of your answer is a great segue into another question from Basha. Do you see your work as political in the sense of having an agenda, or do you see it more as a process of questioning and or observation?
I would say that it's more in the processing and questioning and observation realm. Again, I think about artists as almost like, I don't know, like art therapists, although we're doing it ourselves, but then in the process of bringing audiences in, that we're all trying to like kind of decipher the world and kind of find a common sense of kind of diagnosis and healing. And again, I was talking about how the Infinitely Yours is really made out of like kind of this like climate anxiety that I was really feeling in the last few years, and how it's kind of like a process of addressing that or exorcism or something to make the piece and to perform it, like to be a body that is like spewing out trash or guzzling oil, to kind of like have to live out these metaphors through performance. Um, and I would say that like, like anytime that like in that way, it kind of like touches into the political in terms of like, everything personal is kind of touches into the political. But I feel like for me, it's kind of more the questioning, my own processing that I want to bring the audiences into with me.
So true. Well, thank you, Miwa, for bringing us into your process with you tonight. Looks like we don't have any more questions. So I just want to thank you again for taking your time to share your beautiful creations with us and to share your thoughts and observations and a lot of your artwork. And I'd like to thank our audience for coming and wish you all a wonderful evening and a good night.
Oh, good night. Thank you.